The problem that we have today is we don't realize that when grades were first introduced into the educational system, they were intended to give teachers feedback on how they were doing. If I'm a teacher and my students aren't learning the material, then I need to do something about that. I need to teach it well enough so that they learn it. And if I'm a good teacher, I would want all of my students to get A's because I've succeeded in getting them all to do A work. If I have a lot of students who are failing or falling behind, I consider as a teacher that that's my fault. I'm not doing a good enough job of teaching. And so I think we need to go back to recognize that the grades were designed to give feedback to teachers, not to students. What the bell curve is doing is teaching us to look at each other in a competitive way instead of a cooperative way. Now, all research that has been done on the subject of cooperation versus competition shows that cooperation always works as well as or better than competition. Competition never wins over cooperation. And so what we need to do is create classrooms in which students learn to cooperate. And they spread the learning among themselves in such a way that it's a little bit harder to say who did what. But the whole point is it doesn't matter because the learning was accomplished. And if the student can do well in the end, can perform the tasks that we're teaching them to do, then there's no reason to be critical of that situation. What we need to do is something that practically no one has ever done in the history of education, and that is teach for results. And what that means is you teach in such a way that you get the material taught to every single student. Now, I know some people that guarantee their results in the corporate training they do, and they say, we will guarantee that every single person that we teach will ultimately be able to learn and use what we are teaching them to do. That is something that people need in corporations. And so they say our guarantee is that 87% of the people will be able to do it right the first time through, and the others we will keep training a couple of weeks longer until such point as they can do it too. And this is taking the responsibility that all teachers should be taking, which is to make sure that the students learn, because they can learn if they are properly taught. And that means we need to learn what proper teaching is, what it takes to get students to learn the material that we want them to learn. I think it's possible that within 5 years in the United States of America, 95% of the students in public schools, in schools everywhere in this country, could be learning in such a way that they are regarded as gifted and talented by the standards we use today. We have the means to train students to do this. And once that happens, we will have a much more competent population, and we will be much more likely to solve at every level of society the problems we need to solve. The teaching that we're doing today, because it does not properly educate the vast majority of people, is causing huge problems as things get more technically complicated and fewer people are able to deal with them effectively. So if we are to survive into the future, we really have to improve the quality of teaching in such a way that everybody is competent at what they need to do. What it will take to get the public education to be what we all want is to, first of all, have one demonstration school that shows that you can go from a bad school to a good school, from a good school to a great school, and from a great school to a renaissance. And when we go to the renaissance, what I mean is that everybody graduating from that school will be a genius. Now, we know how to do this. It's just a matter of doing it. And so we need to take one school and do that. And when that school has demonstrated how easy it is to accomplish all of these stages of development, then we need to train all the other schools that are interested in replicating what that school has done so that they do it too. And my experience tells me that as we continue to do this, there will be more and more desire on the part of all the other schools to replicate what the really great schools are doing so that every school in America is a great school. There is nothing that we're asking teachers to do that almost every teacher in America right now cannot learn to do. but we have taught them incorrectly, and they are using methods that do not work. So we need to teach them in a new way so they use the methods that are effective in transforming the experience of the students. In a good classroom, in a good school, the students will learn so deeply and so powerfully that they will not want the class to end. They will not want to go home at the end of the day. And when they do go home, they will be exploring further the things they learned in the classroom that day. The methodology that teachers use today is based on incorrect assumptions about human learning. I'll give you one example. You're supposed to start with the easy stuff and move progressively toward the harder stuff. The problem with that is that it always gets harder and harder and harder. So what I do is I take the hardest thing in the course and teach that first, and after that everything else is easy. Now, how can I do that? Well, the reason it's harder is it's more complicated. And it's more complicated because it has a systemic interaction among the various elements. If I teach the systemic interaction among the various elements first, people can learn it, and then once they understand that, everything that follows makes sense in terms of the system that has been developed. So, to give an example, don't teach addition as the first thing that you teach students to do. Teach long division as the very first thing they encounter in math class. But do it in such a way that the students fully understand everything that happens in a long division problem. Now, what's very important here is that you don't start with symbols like the number 2 written on the board. You bring the students up in front of the class and you show them as here's student 1 and here's student 2, and we put them together, we get 2. Then we make one student move away and we say 2 minus 1 leaves 1. And they experience that in terms of the body of the students in front of the class. And this is called a kinesthetic model. And so we take students in the class, and we might take 2 weeks to do this. We take the students in this class and we have them actually act out a long division problem by moving their bodies around and understanding every step of this process. We have now taught addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Once they understand that, they can do all the problems very quickly and easily, and they'll probably learn all of their basic arithmetic in about 2 weeks. We do the same thing with algebra. You take the last problem in Algebra 1 and you teach that first. You might take 2 weeks to do it. But by the time that they've learned that, they can do all the rest of the stuff in algebra easily. And so this is a very simple method. I have used it in corporations where they teach highly technical subjects, and they radically decrease the amount of time it took to teach that subject and the retention of the students of that information a long time after they had learned it in the class.